One of the biggest things we hear as teachers at All Saints at the moment are things like we don't know how to teach maths anymore, and we didn't get taught this way when we were at school. And this is totally understandable. Maths teaching has changed drastically over a period of time, and many of us can't always make sense of the processes we use now to try and teach our children mathematical concepts, and that's okay. So the aim of this PowerPoint and the aim of the Open Morning is that you can get a sense of why we take the approaches we do and how it suits and benefits your children in All Saints. So to give you a bit of background on what the curriculum actually states, and this is for all children, is that by the end of Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 is that children are able to be fluent in the fundamentals of maths. So that includes things like number facts, that includes that deep understanding of number, that ability to be able to recall things at quickening paces, and that's through varied and frequent practice, and that progressive over time where things become more complex. And the reasoning for that is that pupils can develop a good understanding for that area of maths being covered, and they are then able to recall and apply that knowledge more rapidly and accurately towards the end of that knowledge, and that actually when they come back to that, they can then recall what it is exactly that they did through extended periods of time. The second part also talks about reasoning mathematically. So this is about children knowing what they're going to do, spotting and understanding what it is that they're actually going to approach the situation with, being able to discuss those relationships and making generalisations about the maths that's taking place. And then from that, they develop an argument or justification using mathematical language and mathematical terminology to be able to support their reasonings as to why. And finally, it's the idea that they can solve problems. So the idea that they can approach these routine and non-routine problems in a sophisticated way. So that's things like breaking it down into series of simpler steps, trying to seek solutions to that, finding the most efficient ways to solve those problems too. In maths, we use a mastery approach. Now, this is an approach that you may hear a lot in education at the moment. It is an approach to teaching that was inspired by high-performing countries in international tests. A lot of these countries were around South Asia, so it's taken from their approaches to teaching. Funding was allocated by governments to invest in this approach and to encourage primary schools to invest in this approach and secondary schools. And it's just to support that teaching of mathematics for both children and teachers. So it's based on the belief that all children can achieve in maths. So this means that we no longer teach children different concepts based on whether they are seen to be either less able or more able. Instead, how we teach is through a whole class approach, and we offer that extra support to those children who perhaps find that topic more difficult. And then we can challenge children who perhaps are high flyers or who are finding the concept relatively simple through questioning and through variation. So concepts are built in really small logical steps, and this is explored through the process with clear mathematical models and images. What we really want to focus on when we are teaching our maths is that idea that we focus on the depth of understanding. So really giving children that secure understanding for that area of mathematics that we're looking at, and that we don't actually push them on into the next year group. What we do is we deepen that knowledge. And that's just so that all children, no matter their ability, have that opportunity to embed that learning. We try to teach, as I've said, through those models and images, but we also provide high quality resources, which we present in a structured approach through lessons, and it provides opportunities for plenty of practice for children to really embed those key bits of knowledge. Children will use objects and pictures to physically represent the mathematical concepts alongside those numbers and symbols, and this just helps children to be able to visualise what it is that they're looking at, and then really make those clear links to those more abstract things such as number sentences. So maths mastery is that approach to teaching maths, as I've previously said, where lots of children are included. They are kept at the same point of teaching. Learning is supported or pushed on through questioning or scaffolding, so where we provide additional models, additional support for children. But some of the underpinning principles for maths mastery is that everyone can learn and enjoy maths. We don't hold those preconceptions about children we know perhaps that won't enjoy it. We go in with that idea that everyone can learn and enjoy it. We try to develop really good learning behaviours with children that push them to be engaged and focus fully in those lessons. We won't see passive learning in our lessons. All children are expected to engage, to reason, to make connections as they go through the lesson, whether that be through models or representations or using some of the manipulatives that they'll see in the classroom, or even if that's just talking verbally. We push our staff to develop their specialist knowledge for teaching. So we will work collaboratively with other schools, particularly across our academies, to improve our teaching. We also work with schools across the county as well, so that we can see best practice constantly. And we design our curriculum to ensure that we really think about those small logical steps that children can take. And what the aims of that are is so that we can support that progression over time for children, but that actually we go at a pace where all children can keep up, and that learning can be really embedded and deepened, which is one of the aims of the national curriculum. So many of the points I've previously mentioned are many of the reasons why we choose to take a mastery approach to our teaching of mathematics. But to kind of put that into a bit of a nutshell, it's that idea that children develop that really deep, long-term understanding of maths, and they're adaptable in the ways in which they can approach that, using those more efficient methods, or using methods that they find that works best for them. It's an inclusive approach where we feel all children can achieve. We have children in our school who are disadvantaged, who have a particular need, and we feel that this best supports them and supports their well-being as well, because it allows them to be able to be included and not feel different in the lesson. It works at a slower pace, so we get greater progress, so our lessons are much slower than perhaps we would have seen lessons when we were at school, and what that allows all children to do is make that progress within that learning. And it just helps our children to feel more confident in maths and to not hold preconceptions about what their abilities are. And we really hopefully are creating some really resilient learners, children who take ownership of their own learning and who are engaged all the time and are happy to make mistakes. And lots of these points link to our school improvement plan, that idea of working with things that are high quality teaching, using modelling, feedback, that retrieval of prior knowledge, which we do constantly in mathematics, and that idea of being able to support those children who really need it most, those children with additional needs, those children who are from disadvantaged backgrounds. Our approach to teaching mathematics is aimed at supporting all children, but particularly our children who require that greatest level of support. At All Saints, we follow a maths scheme. This is one of the schemes that are recommended by the government. Maths No Problem is the name of the scheme, and it is predominantly based on those South Asian approaches to teaching maths, and has actually been developed by maths specialists. So a lot of the approaches that you'll see link really clearly to maths mastery, but also have been created by people who are experts in that field. Thinking about maths mastery, one of the first things we think about is that idea that we can break content down into those really small sequential steps, which builds gradually on knowledge so that children can keep up, and that knowledge is really embedded and deepened as we go throughout quite a large topic. So here we can see something like multiplication and division of 2, 5 and 10, and you can see on the right how we break those that big topic into those smaller steps. That just allows children to be able to keep up within the learning and doesn't allow children to fall behind. And over time, what we'll see is that children's knowledge is embedded, and that throughout the lessons, children are making greater progress because their learning is secure and their knowledge for that concept is really, really clear and embedded. So each lesson in maths across Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 starts with an explore task. So this is where children are given a real life problem, and children will take time to journal and find their own ways to solve this task. Children will work collaboratively with one another to develop strategies in how they can approach this problem, and that will all be based on their prior knowledge. So children will have to draw upon knowledge perhaps from previous year groups, or even start to make links to other areas of mathematics. So children may dip into addition for this one. Even though we as adults can clearly see that it's a multiplication question, children will perhaps fall upon those methods that they already know. Before children start the explore task, teachers will question about how they may approach that. They will make links to those previous learnings, as I've previously said. There'll be things around the classroom that support children in perhaps making those links to prior knowledge. Children will have lots of resources available to use or to access if they feel that they need them. And children will give a variety of different responses to solving the problem. And that's what we kind of want to see. We want to see that children are showing that variation, that they show that they can show that mathematics and show their thinking in lots of different ways. And as I've already said, children will work collaboratively. They work together to try and solve that problem, and lots of children will offer that support and scaffold for one another, but there'll also be adults around the room working with those children who we know particularly struggle, and they will support those children through that questioning, modelling and scaffolding, and pointing to key resources that perhaps could help them. So once children have made their own journals, they've thought about their own processes around how they're going to solve the task at hand, and they've made those jottings in their books, or perhaps used the manipulatives around the room to support them, we will see that the whole class then come back together. So rather than children just working with children on their tables, we will then start to share methods from around the classroom and show how they tackled a problem. Children will share their processes with the whole class, so teachers may target individuals who they have seen use processes that perhaps are really supportive, but what teachers will then do is they will model those processes either under visualizers on the computer, or they will use flip chart paper to work with children around the room to really show and unpick that mathematics that's taken place. What you can see here is an example of children, what we might see in children's books, and how actually we move from that more visual approach into a more abstract approach. So we call this kind of the concrete pictorial abstract approach, where we start off quite concretely with apparatus from around the room. We then move into those kind of picture jottings, which children may have represented in their books, and then we move on to those more abstract models of things such as a number sentence here, so such as 16 divided by 2. So the previous models will really help children to unpick the mathematical concepts, make those generalizations, and be able to discuss and reason verbally as to why they know that that's the approach they're going to take. So what you can see here is, again, another way in which children may have represented it. This is what we call variation. So it's that ability that children can show their processes in different ways. They can talk about which methods are most efficient for them and why. And it really encourages that mathematical talk. It encourages them to reason why they chose a particular method as well. So, we really push children to show their mathematics in lots of different ways, but what teachers will eventually do is they will eventually kind of narrow that down into a process that we really want children to embed and then use and utilise in the future. The next section of the maths lesson is called the master. The master is designed so that children can apply that knowledge that they've developed through that structure and representation that teachers have picked as a whole class with the children. And from that, children can then really start to embed and get that frequent practice of the key skills that the teachers really want them to embed over that period of time. So here again, you can see how some of those models have been brought through from the structure and representation. And again, it's those really clear links to this is what it looks like concretely. This is how we might draw it or represent it in a pictorial way. And then we really abstract it in the end through that use of a number sentence. And it's really getting children familiar with what is taking place, what each part of a number sentence actually means, and it really helps to embed that in the future. So when they come across those problems where they have similar things what they have to do, they know immediately that is the process that they're going to go through, because this is the most efficient method for them. What this also allows teachers to do is to actually unpick perhaps some of those misconceptions that are arising with some of our children. So because we've got these really small sequential steps in our math lessons, it really allows teachers to get involved in the children's mathematics and really kind of tailor individual support for those children that need it most. So throughout this process, we will see those children that perhaps are struggling a little bit more, offer more guidance and support for them through those use of models, that repetitive language, that repeating of a process, and just really allows teachers to unpick what is taking place before they then move on to those more independent activities. So once children have had an opportunity to explore the maths for themselves and pick it as a whole class, visualise, embed, practice again, we then come on to a part of the lesson called guided practice. Now, this allows that collaborative approach still, so children will still work collaboratively in the classroom. We continue to scaffold approaches for children through that representation, the language, the structure, the modelling, and children do continue to work as a class for the most part. But what we do tend to see in the guided practice is some of our children who perhaps found the concept relatively a simple process. It's something that they've already got that really good prior knowledge of, or they've really been able to embed and progress well through the lesson. They may go off on their own, but the expectation is that they do then come back in with the teacher and check that what they've done is okay, that it actually follows that same process that the teacher has used. What you will tend to see in a lot of guided practices is this idea of variation. Children will have questions that get increasingly more difficult. So as you go through the guided practice, you'll tend to see that perhaps digits change, parts of the structure of things change, and children are given less support in terms of sentences to support them or scaffold their thinking. After the guided practice, we then move on to the independent practice. So as you can see throughout this whole process, there are really small steps where teachers can regularly check in with children's learning, make sure that everyone keeps up, make sure that all the learning has been embedded, that all children are making progress. And by the independent practice, what we hope is that most children are able to access this independently. So children apply all of the learning that has taken place, all of that really deep embedded knowledge of what is actually taking place, and they'll work independently to reflect what they know. Some children may continue to work with resources, so they won't be able to do this completely independently. They may require that additional scaffold from the resource around the room. That might not necessarily be an adult member of staff. That may be those physical manipulatives that they have out on their tables. And what this just allows those children to do is to reduce a bit of that what we call cognitive load, that constant asking children of something. So that ability for them to just remove one of the barriers to their learning and access it in their own way. That just allows children to really deepen that knowledge and deepen their understanding for those children. Variation continues throughout the independent practice, so questions will get increasingly harder. We'll see representations change, perhaps representations removed, structures removed. So you can see on the first question here, they are given the 2 groups, or they are given the 5 groups to be able to share out the carrots or to share out the caterpillars on the leaf. But as we move over into question 2, children aren't given that scaffold. They are expected to use them on their own to be able to use that knowledge that they've learned throughout the lesson. So the Don Now Jin is the last part of the lesson. It actually translates to use your head, so it's the opportunity for children to really show that what they've done previously is embedded, it's a knowledge that is now deepened, and it just gives them that additional opportunity to problem solve. So it creates those children who are really fluent in that skill and who can really show that mathematical thinking and that mathematical understanding, because they're able to make connections to previous bits of knowledge that they've already done, and it allows them to unpick those problems. We talk about those sophisticated problems. These are some of the sophisticated problems we would be expecting our children to unpick into small steps and be able to access by themselves towards the end of our lessons. Some children may need additional support with kind of reading these, but children should be accessing them independently. This is an opportunity for them to really kind of show what they've understood throughout the lesson. In early years, we're currently following a mastery approach. It's something we've seen in early years for a long time anyway, where we clearly see those structures drawn out, those representations shared with children, so they can really visualise those concepts that are taking place. What we have started to try and embed are new structures to support the learning in reception. We try to follow a similar approach to Maths No Problem. So what you'll see is that there is a carpet-based session, and children readily have those resources, those manipulatives available for them. Children will have a real push on the development of their language, so children are encouraged to use the correct terminology to support them in talking about their maths, and teachers will model this really well to them. And what you will see is that the continuous provisions, the little activities set up around the room, match those objectives, that concept's being explored. Nursery may differ slightly, so we may see that children start off with some of these key activities and will then go into group sessions where they will then follow that mastery approach. Again, lots of representations, lots of manipulatives, really showing and unpicking that maths. What we are looking at introducing in September is a new scheme, so we are now starting with Maths No Problem in reception. This wasn't something that was previously offered, so this is something quite new and something we're really looking forward to introducing in our school to ensure that consistency and to ensure that all our children are getting those really good mathematical opportunities and those mathematical structures that we want. So fluency is a massive part of maths mastery. It ensures that children can really access the maths taking place in the lessons. What we actually have in early years and Key Stage 1 is a fluency called Mastering Number. This again is created by maths specialists, and it's a 20-minute session each day where children are getting more access to that rich understanding and that deep understanding of number, and as well fluency of number facts. So what we hope by doing these sessions is that children are really deepening that number of that composition, that their understanding, of their composition of number, key number facts, so that actually when they go into those lessons, we're reducing a bit of the ask for children because some of that knowledge is already there. We aren't expecting that they're coming into a lesson having to remember lots of things and that they are then being overloaded. We are asking children to focus on that concept because they will have had fluency sessions that support them in some of these key areas and being able to access some of those key concepts they'll be taught. Hopefully lots of you can kind of see the approaches we take to mathematics now and understand why we take these approaches and how they're really beneficial to our children. But there are still things you can do to help and things you can do to kind of develop your understanding of our approach a little bit further. So there are lots of ways you can get involved. You can access some of the parent videos that Maths No Problem actually offer online. I've popped in a QR code there so you can access that. It talks about watching these parent videos. They are led by one of the experts who actually created Maths No Problem. When you work through problems with children, they may get stuck. You don't need to rush them. Again, it's that really slow process we talk about. That's how we approach our maths now. Don't rush them. Allow them to kind of see the mathematics and pick it, and then move on to those more abstract concepts. And then find lots of opportunities to kind of solve or take those mathematical opportunities in real life situations. Look for patterns, look for connections, play games that involve numbers, and kind of encourage children to show them that maths isn't something they should be scared of. I know lots of our own anxieties around maths can really rub off on children, and children may come in with those preconceptions about maths based on our own feelings towards it. So it's really important that we don't show that to children as much as we can, and that actually we see that maths isn't something they should be scared of. Maths is something that everyone can learn and that everyone has the ability to be able to access in some way. What I've also included in here is the link to our calculation policy. Now, this really clearly states the ways in which that we will cover key concepts in each year group for each calculation. So addition, subtraction, multiplication and division. So if you are ever stuck on an approach, you can really see how we take it back to the basics, the sort of manipulatives that we'll use, how we then move that on to those more pictorial approaches, and how we then really abstract it into some of those number sentences that we might come across, and those key things that perhaps when we saw at school we were perhaps a little bit scared of initially. We can show how we can break it down to children, and that can be really supportive when you get that homework at home particularly. In addition to some of the previous things mentioned, we also have other resources that can help. We use White Rose for our homework, so this is kind of the place to start if you are ever stuck on some of those homework questions, or you need an understanding around how in which to approach it. What White Rose offer are their schemes of learning online for free, and they really unpick it, what the key learning is, how we might then move that on from those pictorial representations into those more abstract approaches that we may see. What they also offer as well are those key bits of language, sentence stems we may use with our children as well to really support and break down that knowledge as well. And in addition to those, they also have the year group kind of concept books. So they break each book down into year groups and then into each concept. So you'll see some of the examples there are kind of part wholes within 10, addition and subtraction, shape for each year group. And they're again free to access at home and can be really supportive in kind of giving children those extra opportunities to practice, or even for yourselves to really see how the maths can be unpicked. In addition to the things mentioned in the previous slide, there are also things online again that can help. So White Rose, which is what we use for our homework, they offer all of their overviews for the year, for each concept, which do marry up quite well to the Maths No Problem. And again, lots of the representations will be the same, lots of the models will be the same, lots of the kind of language will be the same as well. So children will be familiar with a lot of the things you can see here, and actually if they do require that extra support, this is kind of the place you do want to go to if you want to offer that extra guidance for them. In addition to those as well, we also have the kind of workbooks in the top there as well. So these were created as home learning, but they have kept them online. These are just another opportunity for children to practice some of those key skills, and for yourselves, just kind of see how it's kind of ordered, how it's kind of abstracted throughout a paper, and what's expected of the children at perhaps different year groups for different concepts.